So, welcome to the brandtuned podcast, Joe. Tell us a bit more about yourself, please.
Thank you very much for having me. So my name's Joe Glover. I am now 30 years old, which is a new thing for me, which is mad. And I run a company called the Marketing Meetup, which is a community of some 28,000 plus marketers around the world now. About 77% of those are UK based. The rest are distributed from Macedonia to America. And we come together to learn about marketing, connect with other marketers, and do it in a way which feels kind and lovely and safe and inclusive. We come together because we love marketing. We want to get better at it. We're curious, open-minded people. But we sort of run as a bit of a counterblast to folks who sort of feel that we need to be judged by our job titles or our budgets. We come together because we want to get better, and that feels like the right thing to do. So all in all, it's a really lovely experience, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. I'm very, very lucky. If I was to introduce myself, I would say I'm the luckiest man in the world. So that's me.
So, to go back to 2016, when you decided to set up the Marketing Meetup, I mean, there were plenty of marketing meetup groups on places like Meetup. So, to what do you attribute your success? Initially, it was just in Cambridge. So,
Yeah.
tell me a bit about that.
I guess I would say naivety, ignorance, and elbow grease, probably. But I think, if we're given the serious answer, then it's probably not so much what we do, but how we do it. And as you rightly point out, there's plenty of places where marketers can learn. There's plenty of places where marketers can meet each other. But actually, where you combine both of those things and you create an environment which feels all the words that I used earlier, that's the difference. That's the thing that matters. It matters because there are marketers and there are human beings who don't fit into the traditional mold of this corporate agenda and trying to fit into networking scenarios that don't feel natural. So we just provided something that felt a little bit different, and felt very human. And I think that that's the reason for the main reason for success. It's not what we've done; it's how we've done it. And that comes through in everything we've ever sort of put out there, whether it's the in-person events, the online events, or even just stuff down to our email tone. All of these things matter because every one of those reinforce that we're truly there for people because we want to be, and we want to make it a nice experience. I'm not sure that everyone thinks about things those ways, but because it's just me and one part-time employee and one director, we're not driven by a massive commercial agenda. We're genuinely there to help. And over the course of time, then we found that the money's kind of followed as well, which means that we can continue to do it. But yeah, really, the success is just about really caring about people and providing that environment where they feel welcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done plenty of sort of networking, sorted out networking events in my time, but I never then went on to think this could be something bigger. So what made you think that, apart from just providing a networking event, that this could be something else? I mean, did you start with that intention?
No, absolutely not. So after the first event, then it was my mission was achieved. I'd met other marketers, I learned about marketing, and I had a lovely time doing it. And in fact, I continued doing it in Cambridge over the course of 6 to 8 months without any sort of like expansion or anything like that. It was only when folks were coming up to me over the course of time and saying, "Hey, I've driven from Birmingham to come to this event in Cambridge to go to a canteen," that I was sort of like, that's interesting. Combine that with other folks who are coming up to me and saying, "Look, I've come to this event from Bedford, and actually I'd love to run an event closer to my house, and actually I'm quite happy to do it myself with your blessing, just under our banner." And so that's how we grew over the course of time. It was never set out to be this mad journey that it's been. It's all been very organic, where people have sort of recognized that there is something in I want to say there's something in the brand, but there wasn't really a brand early on. There's just something in how we've chosen to do things that people resonate with and want to do more of.
Mhm.
So yeah, there was never a big ambition. And in fact, that's something that I've wrestled with over the course of time as well, because when you start a community like I have, then I think you start in a place of like, look, I just want to give. I want to give, 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 give. And when folks walk up to you and sort of say, hey, I'd like to give you a bit of money and can I put my logo on it and stuff like that? You're like, oh no, I don't want your money. But then of course there's practicalities to these things. And for the longest time, I thought that it had to be a pure experience free of commercialism. And actually, when we're speaking about community, then there's a practical side to it, which is, look, it's really important that we do have some financial stuff in there too. Um, and for that reason, it's great to seek out partners who sort of match those ambitions and match that sort of um, that way of thinking. And even that element of it, the financial element of it, has been entirely enjoyable because of the folks who contribute to that part of the world as well.
So at what point did you actually create the brand, in terms of thinking that it's about kindness and being lovely, etc.? When did that come about, and your logo and all that?
Well, the first logo was made in Paint, in Microsoft Paint. It was a square with some words in it, and that was it. There was nothing fancy about it, and we had that from the off, but that was about it. The rest, it kind of comes in two stages. So the foundation of the group was very much about that humanity and coming together and listening, overselling, and that was clear from the off. That was the group that I wanted to attend, so that's the language I put around the event, and therefore it attracted folks who were attracted to that language. We based the meetup on meetup.com initially as well, so we got that initial traction through that platform. However, there was also like an organic evolution over the course of time. So we use 3 words to describe how folks should behave at marketing meetup events, which is listen, say hello, and be positively lovely. And we reinforce those things all the time. And those 3 sort of phrases only came into being maybe 6-7 months into the journey, which means to say that it was just a moment that I put something on the slide, and then I was at the front and I was presenting, and then people just sort of smiled back at me when they saw that those sort of values were conveyed. And it was in that moment where I was like, maybe I'll just mention that again next month. And then, people sort of came back and like, oh, be positively lovely. That sounds really twee, which it is. But it's also something that stood out. And so twofold answer to your question. The first was that it was quite a conscious act to create a group that felt like that. But in terms of defining the branding and stuff like that, then that was an iterative process over the course of time. Another example of that is that our present branding, the logos, the look, the feel of the marketing meetup, I think we've only had that for about 14 months. So actually the marketing meetup's been going for nearly 6 years now. And it was only relatively recently in the scale of that journey that we actually changed to something that looks semi-professional. Before that, it was still the same old logo that was made in Paint. And actually the rest of it was the most important thing for us was the look, that was the feel of the event, the feel of the communications, and everything else kind of followed from that point, really.
Yeah. So with a name like Marketing Meetup, you can't really protect it except as a logo. So,
yeah.
How do you actually control who uses the name? I mean, to the extent that you can. If somebody wants to set up a marketing meetup in another part of the country, why would they come to you? And, tell me how you've managed that.
So we've got a fairly sort of comprehensive initially we called them franchisees. I think really they're organizers. We've got a fairly comprehensive organizer manual that exists. I think it's about 4,000 words on how to run a marketing meetup event with logos and sort of language tips and stuff like that. So in terms of getting folks to use the marketing meetup stuff in the right way, then that's how we do it. Also, all of our organizers would have previously been attendees at marketing meetup events as well. So they'll know the look and feel of the event because they've been there, they've experienced it.
Right.
You're definitely right in terms of like, it's definitely like the Ron Seal thing, it's kind of, the name is what it says on the tin, sort of thing. And people come to me from time to time sort of saying, what do you think of this name of this company? And I'm like, I don't know, I called my thing the most obvious thing in the world. um, I would say that it's obviously very, very hard to protect on a sort of like legal level, but I think we've got the brand awareness now in the community, certainly in the UK, that folks, if someone else was to start something called the Marketing Meetup now, people will be like, is that thing? And sort of feedback that was a thing. So I guess we've kind of reached that sort of escape trajectory to a certain extent, that certainly in the UK, that it would be weird if someone else was to do it now. But there's an Eastern European company called Marketing Meetup, and we coexist perfectly happily. I've never spoken to them, but it's not a problem.
So do you charge a license fee for people to become franchisees? How does it work?
No, we don't. So this is in the context of pre-COVID world. So we had 13 locations around the UK, and then we'd started in New York as well, pre-COVID. And if we're speaking like in purely commercial language, which I don't really like to do about the meetup all that often, but if we're speaking in that way, then it was definitely a deliberate strategy that like we knew we could grow the community quicker if we had more events. And therefore it was in our interest to have more locations, and therefore a barrier to entry of asking people to pay lots of money to represent the Marketing Meetup wasn't really going to be the way that we did things. Secondly, combined in that, I think when you find people you trust and enjoy the company of and love bouncing the ideas off and stuff like that, you can't help but be excited to work with them. And so when a bunch of exciting people sort of get in touch and say, I'd love to run an event near me, I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it. So it's that was never really an issue about money changing hands on those things. We did offer a profit split. So if local organizers were to run an event that ran profitably off the basis of sponsorship that they could gather in their local area, then we would split it. I think it was 70-30 in their favor. Again, the meetup's never really been a wonderful exercise in business. It's an exercise in community first and foremost. But the interesting thing about that was most of our organizers were had next to no interest at all in being paid for being involved with the community. They of course get benefits of standing in the front of a room and sort of saying, hey, I'm Nick, and welcome to the Marketing Meetup presented by me. That's undoubted that, their sort of personal branding would be a good thing. But financially, nobody was really that bothered. So it was a fairly easy, very human interaction of let's do something fun together. And it was.
So it's a bit, reminds me of places like Toastmasters, which have become very international, and I don't think people make a lot of money out of it, but it's just a format for people to learn how to speak in public. And I guess what you're doing is a way to learn about marketing, I guess.
Absolutely. No, it's very, very similar. I don't know the Toastmasters model in and out, and so I can comment on the similarities or differences, but certainly in terms of the spirit of it, then it feels quite similar. And people speak so warmly about Toastmasters as well, how it's helped them move forward and get better. That's, I can't, lie that the money element is not important, but it's not the most important thing. And so, if we're covering our faces, I've got a 11-month-old daughter, and if I can afford to feed her and heat the house, then that's good. And then the rest of the time we'll focus on helping people.
Sure. So you've got sponsors who help you to meet your running expenses, presumably any staff that you need.
Yeah. So we've got.
When did you first get sponsors?
Right from the off,
Oh,
straight from, yeah.
mhm,
So the first two sponsors were a company called Brand Recruitment and Cambridge Marketing College.
mhm,
And the thought that I had going through my head was, I'm going to bring a bunch of
mhm,
marketers into a room. Who wants to speak to a bunch of marketers? And
mhm,
Brand Recruitment are a marketing recruitment specialist company, and Cambridge Marketing College do marketing qualifications. So
mhm,
there were two no-brainers in
mhm,
the local area to sort of approach. Um, as I said, it wasn't really a massive profit generating exercise, in that I think I needed about £200 to run my first event, to put the buffet on, because it was always important to have food and drink and stuff like that. And the venue was given to us for free by Redgate Software.
mhm.
So, and in fact, Redgate Software managed to sort of like hire a couple of people from the Marketing Meetup off the back of it and stuff. So, you know, they're happy. But yeah, straight from the off, we sort of had these relationships with sponsors, initially to sort of cover the cost of the event. But as the brand recognition grew, then of course, you know,
Mm.
we're getting, you know, actually fitting more sponsors in is the problem nowadays, rather than the other
Right.
way around, which is a really pleasant situation to be in from my
Yeah, so
perspective.
you're oversubscribed in terms.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, which yeah, it's good. It's nice to be in that position.
Mm. Yeah. You
Definitely.
also have a marketing company, is that right? Empath.
Yeah, well, yeah, on the side. So I do bits and pieces on the side, marketing consultancy, strategy, mostly strategic stuff.
Mhm.
I have to say that I don't actually find the tactical implementation of marketing all that interesting, which is a bit of a shock admission for the podcast. But you know, I find the dialogue around, you know, I 10x'd my efforts on my website, and you know, got £1 million ARR or something like that. You know, it just doesn't particularly interest me. But the strategic sort of stuff,
Mhm.
coming up with a clear position, a clear message, knowing who you're going to go after, understanding the needs of the market. All these things are really, really interesting, because they're about people. It's about
Yeah.
matching. You know, there's a really bad equation for marketing, which I share from time to time, which is you have a customer with a need and a company with a product or a solution. And really, all you're trying to do as a marketer is communicate one to the other.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the equal sign at the end of it is that there's a human life improved at the end.
Yeah.
And so I don't really care about the nuts and bolts all that much, but I do care about the outcome and the big sort of picture stuff that takes us along that journey. And so
Mm.
the lovely thing about marketing is that you can apply very similar sort of principles in a range of companies. I was speaking with a flare gas management company the other day, and
Mhm.
was applying the same principles as I was to a mental health first aid company, you know, a few weeks later. So it's all very similar processes, with very different outcomes, of course. But once you've got those principles down, then it's good. But the thing about that is that I think it's very easy along the way to sort of, as marketers, because we've all digested
Mm.
diagnosis, strategy, and tactics, to think that the whole world knows that sort of stuff.
Mm.
They don't. You know, everyone sees the tactics as what marketing is,
Yeah.
and that's not a revelationary sort of statement. I think that's something that is said a lot in marketing circles.
Mm.
Um, but for the sort of layperson on the street, that's something that they see what marketing is, and that's what they ask for. So actually, to sort of come in and sort of say, well, have you understood your customer, and what are your key messages?
Mm.
You'll often get sort of blank eyes, and you need to take them on that journey. So that's an exciting thing about doing what we do on sort of like a consultancy basis.
Yeah.
Fun.
So it's really quite difficult to understand the customer. I mean, when you first started, presumably you were creating it for yourself, for
Mm.
people like you. But then how did you get to find out more about who was actually in the audience
Just
once you'd sort of taken off with it?
yeah, listen. Honestly,
How
it's
do you listen though? Because people often are not willing to give time to discuss because your brand doesn't really matter to them.
Mhm,
They've got lots
mhm,
to do. So,
mhm.
how do you actually get people to talk to you so you can find out more?
Well, it really depends. So it depends on the company. So let's take a really morbid example, a funeral parlor.
Yeah.
that would be an example of a company that people really wouldn't want to sort of spend an awful lot of time speaking to.
Mm,
However, when you go through the process of engaging a funeral parlor in that sort of situation, then your customers are going to be asking you a bunch of questions.
mhm,
And every time you go through that process, you'll be able to recognize the questions that are being asked and sort of the patterns of behavior that are being displayed.
mhm,
And then you can go, oh, wait, that's really interesting. Let's sort of change, because actually our marketing doesn't represent any of these questions that we're sort of getting people to come with us for. So let's put an FAQ section on our website that sort of helps people sort of
mhm,
go through the process and know what's going to be important to them up front and make their process a lot easier.
mhm,
That's a really easy example of like where you don't need to get like a focus group or whatever. You're just like observing, listening to the customer, then over the course of time refining what you're doing. And that's the first sort of step. My dog's decided to start snoring in the background, so um, and then you can do more formal parts of listening. So you can do the focus group and you can ask the questions. So something that I do in my emails that I send to my community is ask a question every so often.
mhm.
So it can be as something as simple as "How are you today?" Which is, one could argue, is a data point to suggest the general feel of the marketing community right now, which could help you tailor your communications in a way that sort of speaks to those people in that headspace. That could be an example of listening a little bit more.
But do they
Uh,
actually reply if you send an email saying, "How are you today?"
yeah, absolutely. At the beginning of COVID,
Mhm,
um, we sent an email to our entire database and just said, "Hi, uh, we're all scared right now, and you know what, if you need someone to chat to, just drop us a message and we'll reply." We
mhm,
had over 200 replies that day, and I
mm,
went through every one of them and replied and had conversations and stuff like that. People care if you show that you care. But people use this horrible language in marketing, which is like, "We would love your feedback."
mm,
Who cares if
mm,
people want your feedback?
mm,
Actually, the thing that they want to help is get a better process at the end, a better product at the end, improve their life in some way.
mm,
So if you can display that you're going to use that information in a way that is genuinely going to improve their life or
mm,
help them through a problem that they're facing right now, then all of a sudden, people become more willing. But that's about being far more human with these things. It's, putting this corporate language around it puts people's barriers up and they sort of go, "Nah, you're all right." I
mm,
think it's I sort of started this answer by saying listen and making it a super simple thing, but I genuinely do think it's quite simple. You're listening at every point that you possibly can through the process of engaging with your customers as they go through purchasing, but then also how they interact with your website, what they're writing in Amazon reviews, what they're replying in your emails, what they're saying to your customer service team, who's sending an angry email to your CEO, whoever it may be. These are all opportunities to learn. And if we don't take a defensive point of view on these things, then all of a sudden we can improve so much more, because we're getting this feedback all of the time, whether we know it or not. A
mhm,
lot of people will throw it away and sort of say, "No, it's all right, I'm not really interested." If you're really listening, you really, really care. I'll give one final example because it's already a long answer. But on our newsletter, on the newsletter sign up page, then we've got a simple type form
mhm,
that sort of sits up straight after people sign up for our newsletter. Goes onto that page, and we ask one question, which is, how can we make this newsletter the most amazing experience for you? Language around
mhm.
that sort of ballpark. I've got a spreadsheet of like some 900 responses or something like that from
Oh,
folks who have told us specifically how we can help them. And they might just be like a line or two, but it
mhm,
gives us a gauge on like where we should be going for that. So like there's opportunities throughout everything
mhm,
to listen and learn. And I think sort of stepping out of that formal place and sort of saying, we have to listen in this way, and actually just sort of really being in tune with those informal things is really, really important.
mhm. So, do you think a Facebook group is essential for creating community? I mean, to create an environment where people can connect with each other. What else could you do apart from something like Facebook?
I think if you take the principles of a Facebook group, I don't think it has to be a Facebook group. It could be a Slack channel, it could be a Discord group, it could be a forum, or it could be in-person events. I think the important thing for a community to grow is that they need a place where they can communicate with one another and do it in a place which sort of feels safe. So you set the standard in terms of the environmental values, but then you allow folks to engage with one another in whatever environment it is. I don't think it specifically has to be a Facebook group. So the mini MBA, for example, used
it's on LinkedIn.
a LinkedIn. Personally, I find the functionality of LinkedIn groups not great, particularly around sort of notifications, which is a shame because actually that was the best example of a LinkedIn group that I've seen, and it was still okay. It was a good experience, but not an amazing experience for that LinkedIn group. So I still think in terms of best places to go, then Facebook is probably right up there. However, you sort of see in a lot of sort of tech focused groups and a lot of younger demographics that they're using Discord far more regularly to communicate.
Discord.
Yes.
Have a look at that.
Yeah.
Then obviously there are negative people around, and you particularly want people to be kind and lovely. So have you come across situations where you had to deal with people being negative, and how have you actually managed it?
Genuinely, and I'm not just saying this, then I think I could count on one hand the amount of bad interactions that I've had over 6 years of the meetup. And the thing that I attribute that to is sort of going up to 11 on the sort of loveliness stuff. So even if people are like a 7 or an 8, then they're already far more lovely than the rest of sort of what you'd expect on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's a cultural thing. It's and we see that in workplace cultures as much as we do in community cultures. You have to be very, very specific on the behaviors that you expect people to be. But once you've done that, for us, it's been absolutely remarkable that you tell people to be lovely and they are. The interesting thing is that in those sort of times where, those 5 or 6 interactions, which haven't been great, they just haven't landed. So someone said something negative, and it's not about being mindlessly optimistic, but we're speaking about being unpleasant here. People just ignored it. It's just been water for ducks back, and people go, well, that's not right for here, so you know what, I'm not going to interact. And it's that thing about don't feed the troll, and that's exactly what's happened. So while of course bad things happen, I think the first defense against it is making sure your culture is really, really strong. After that point, I would say outside of the marketing meetup, because I do a lot of stuff sort of on my own sort of world of things, and they can be 2 separate entities. I've had bad interactions from time to time, and again, I've just chosen not to engage. It doesn't mean that they don't hurt, because quite often they do, and they will be the things, because I'm a radical overthinker. So I sit and I'll dwell on things, and they will ruin my day. But it's a muscle that you get used to, used to developing. And there was only an example last week, where there was a guy sort of making some funny comments and stuff like that. And like, it was a 2-second thing to just click into his profile and block him. And, the mechanisms exist. And rather than allowing myself to be drawn into that sort of world and sort of having my day impacted and being a worse dad, I just sort of thought, nah, I'm not going to engage. So I think that's probably the answer. Is if you can, just don't engage, because you don't need everyone's approval. That's not what you're there for. There is one final example on that, which I appreciate it makes it a long answer, but I remember encountering once on LinkedIn someone saying that my emails made their toes curl because of the tone of the email. They hadn't tagged me into it. They were just speaking about my work, but not to me. And I can't tell you the amount of pleasure that I derived from that, because it proved to me that we were saying something that was worth saying, because nobody reacts to this sort of gray space in between. Nobody reacts to gray. It's either black or white, and we've gone really, really hard on the loveliness stuff.
Mm.
And if they choose to opt out of that, it means we're saying something, but it also means that, of course, there's going to be people who don't agree with it. And that's fine. They can go somewhere else, which isn't lovely.
Well, I've got two more questions for you before we finish, Joe. One is whether there are any books you recommend for community building.
Mhm.
And the other is whether there's any brands you particularly admire for their community.
Mhm. So the second one is easier to answer.
Okay.
So HubSpot do a
Uh-huh.
wonderful job at building community. Um, certainly in terms of building resource, but they bring people together every year for their inbound conference. And that's a great central point where folks have been brought together. And it's radically popular. In a similar vein, Salesforce do something very similar with their Dreamforce conference. Again, it sort of builds this sort of touch point for folks to come and interact with one another.
So just one annual conference they have.
Yeah. However, HubSpot, it's a really great follow-up question there, because HubSpot actually have a series of HubSpot user groups that take place across the world. There's one in Cambridge, for example, which means that HubSpot users can get together and speak about HubSpot, which is pretty amazing for a B2B SaaS, sort of company, that people are that passionate about it, that they're willing to get together. So that's a really good example. People like Harley Davidson, I don't think actually they've done a lot of it. I think quite a lot of that's been quite organic. But you think about the community that's been built around that brand, to the point where people are getting tattoos of the brand on their bodies, shows the strength of the community that they've built. Another example is like Iron Man. People are getting tattoos on their legs, left, right, and center. Having completed an Ironman, and all sorts of companies. There's one lovely last example which I'll give, which is a company called Journey Further, who are a marketing agency
How
based
do you say that? How do you spell it?
at Journey Further. So
Journey Further. Okay. Yeah.
and so Journey Further are a well thought of marketing agency up north. However, the thing about marketing agencies is that nobody really wants to speak to them if they don't have to. It's not something you want to interact with. However, Journey Further have created a book club. It's run by a girl called Isabel, who is phenomenal, and she's passionate, and she really cares about books. And over the course of time, the conversation that Journey Further have is about books. They're not speaking about their clients or their services or the awards they won. They speak about books. They speak about marketing books and stuff like that. They've built a community of some 5,000 people for around this marketing agency, including brands like Spotify and, like these amazing companies. And so they've flipped the narrative on its head about sort of what you have to do to build a community, build an agency and advertise it. They've used community, but done it in the truest sense of the word. They don't mention Journey Further as an agency all that much at all. They speak about books, but from time to time they'll get someone who's a little bit intrigued about the agency, and that's how they kind of sort of make money off the back of it.
Oh, I must look into them. That's really interesting. Thank you.
No problem at all. So really, really great example. But I think the most interesting element behind all of that is that the human being in the center of that community is someone who really, really cares about building a community. And the financial, commercial success off the back of that is secondary to the community element of it. You asked about books and resources. I haven't read any particularly amazing ones.
Really?
And the reason for that is that I think a lot of folks try to engineer community to be some sort of funnel based activity, which is like, it's about commercialism first. I think there can be commercialism as part of a community, but it has to be about community first.
Okay.
And for that reason, I've decided that I'm going to write the book. So that's what I'm doing in my spare time right now.
When you intending to publish that?
It'll be this year. So yeah, so it will be coming out. So I guess that's another exclusive, I guess, and that will be out at some point this year. So
have you got a title for it?
Yeah. We're playing around. I might keep that one in the back pocket for now. So it'll probably be something as imaginative as the marketing meetup, though. So
well, for a book, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. So yeah, that'll be coming out later in the year. And
have you read the guy who set up Zappos and Delivering Wow? He died recently, but he'd written some book about that people mention sometime. Have you read
I haven't. No, I'd like to check it out. If you could send a link or say the name, then I'd be.
I don't know the name, but yeah, I'll email it to you.
Amazing. We'll pop it in the show notes or whatever as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Joe. That's been great speaking to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's my first podcast of the year, so it's a pleasure to break off the rust. So.
That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the brandtuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtuned.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you and bye for now.